Dead Creek shimmered under the weight of a cruel afternoon sun. The sky stretched wide and empty overhead, a washed-out canvas of heat and dust. Cicadas buzzed like tiny machines hidden in the weeds, and the wind kicked up spirals of grit that danced across the wooden boardwalks before disappearing into nothing. Cattle lowed somewhere out beyond the ridge, their calls rolling faintly through the dry air, and boots thudded against dirt, and wood as townsfolk went about their business, quickly, with heads down, not because they feared anything, but because that was just the way of the frontier. You moved fast, or you got stuck in it. The Silver Spur Saloon squatted near the center of town, like a bleached-out relic that refused to fall. Its sign creaked above the doors, half-painted letters scabbed by wind and time. Inside, the world changed. Light turned amber through dusty glass. The air grew thick with pipe smoke and sweat, and the laughter came easy, like it always had. A piano tinkled in the far corner, off-key but enthusiastic, played by a kid with more heart than rhythm. Around battered tables sat old ranch hands, a few rustlers turned merchants, a pair of card sharps who never seemed to win or lose too much, and a man named Grover who hadn't worked a day since the war ended. They talked the way folks in Dead Creek always talked, loud, half-drunk, and proud of things they only half remembered. Cards slapped the tables, mugs clinked, and the bartender, Joe Tanner, poured whiskey with the ease of someone who'd been at it too long to care who you were, as long as your coin wasn't counterfeit. Then the doors opened. No one noticed at first, not really. The hinges squealed the way they always did, and sunlight streamed in hard and blinding. But silence followed, quick and uninvited. It was the kind of pause that came when something unfamiliar enters a place too used to its own rhythm. He stepped inside like a shadow that had waited too long outside. His coat was a dust-choked duster, the kind you only saw on men who'd forgotten what a bed felt like. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but not enough to hide the years etched into his skin, creases like dried riverbeds, a jaw like granite, and eyes that didn't blink as they scanned the room. He wasn't tall, not especially, and he didn't swagger. He just walked like a man with no destination but 1,000 memories behind him. Conversation stumbled, then picked back up, but quieter now, cautious. He moved to the bar and slid onto the end stool, hands resting easy in front of him. Joe Tanner watched him with a bartender's instincts and poured a glass of the good stuff, no questions asked. "Whiskey," the man said. His voice was quiet, sandpaper rough, and barely stirred the air. That was the first and last thing he'd say for the next hour. Cards shuffled again, louder than needed. Laughter returned, this time forced, and the mocking began soon after. Not loud, not cruel. Just the kind of barbed humor small men aim at big silences. "Looks like the preacher's come early," someone muttered near the poker table. "Nah, too grim for a preacher. Maybe a grave digger. Could be an undertaker taking measurements." Laughter bubbled again, stronger now. The quiet man didn't flinch. He lifted the whiskey to his lips, drank slow. His hand never wavered, not even a twitch. It was a little thing. But Joe Tanner noticed. Grover leaned in toward the others at the table, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "Bet he's running from something." They always are, the quiet ones. The man didn't respond. He simply stared straight ahead, as if listening to music no one else could hear. The piano kept on. Outside, a horse neighed. Inside, tension simmered, unspoken but thick. Eli, a wiry stable boy no older than 13, crept in through the saloon doors with wide eyes. He scanned the room until they landed on the stranger. He stood still for a second, just staring, then wandered closer like a moth pulled toward an unfamiliar flame. He didn't speak either. He just stood there, watching the way the man sat, how still he was, how his fingers stayed just a whisper away from the edge of his coat. After a minute, the stranger turned his head just slightly, looked at Eli, and nodded once. It was nothing really, but the boy blinked like he'd been struck by lightning and scurried back toward the door, grinning like he'd just seen something he couldn't explain. That's when Clara May stepped into the saloon. She was as much a fixture in Dead Creek as the old church bell, but where that bell was cracked and rusting, Clara still held her ground. A widow for 5 years now, she ran the general store with sharp hands and sharper eyes. She spotted the stranger at the bar and stopped in her tracks. Her face didn't change, but the pause in her step said enough. She walked to Joe and ordered her usual, 2 jugs of rye and a bag of coffee. When Joe hesitated, distracted by the man at the bar, Clara turned to look at him again. She studied him longer this time, maybe seeing something familiar, or something buried. "New in town?" she asked. The man nodded but didn't look at her. "Just passing." Clara said nothing more. She picked up her goods and left, but not before glancing back once at the stranger. Her eyes narrowed in thought. Outside, the wind kicked up again. The day wasn't getting cooler. Buzzards circled far above, waiting for something they hadn't yet seen. And in the distance, out beyond the buttes, came the sound of horses. Too many. Too fast. Inside the saloon, the stranger took another sip, slow and steady. He set the glass down gently, then pushed it slightly forward. Joe refilled it without asking. The room quieted again, not from fear, but from a slow realization that this man wasn't drunk, wasn't tired, and sure as hell wasn't running. Something about him felt too still, like the air before a storm breaks. At the card table, the laughter faded. The joke stopped. Grover rubbed the back of his neck. One of the card sharps coughed and pretended to focus on his hand. And in the very center of it all, the quiet man sat like a stone, unmoved and unshaken. They didn't know his name. Not yet. But by sundown tomorrow, every soul in Dead Creek would remember exactly where they were when he walked through those saloon doors, because legends don't announce themselves when they arrive. They just wait for the world to test them. Outside, the heat still clung to the land like a fever. Dead Creek shimmered under the dying sun, and in the silver spur, the walls sweated bourbon and secrets. The quiet man hadn't moved from his spot. 2 empty glasses sat in front of him, lined up like fallen soldiers. He drank slow, steady, as if he had nowhere else to be. Maybe he didn't. The piano had gone silent. No one asked why. Conversations drifted like lazy smoke, caught between gossip and worry. Men leaned in closer, voices hushed but urgent. "You hear what came out of Larkspur last week?" said Jimmy Tate, one of the ranch hands with a knack for tall tales. Whole place burned. Riders left nothing but ash and bones. "Same gang," Grover asked, dealing cards but not looking at them. "Mason Hollow riders," Jimmy said, tapping his temple. "Same bastards. Jace Mason and his devils. Heard he don't just rob towns, he empties them. Leaves em quiet forever." "Larkspur's 3 days west," someone muttered. "2, if you ride like hell." Grover leaned back in his chair, chewing on a matchstick. "Ain't our business unless they show here." "They're heading east," Jimmy said. "And we're east." A long silence followed. The room felt smaller for a moment, like the walls had leaned in closer. Clara May, seated near the back with her arms folded, said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward the stranger at the bar, the one who hadn't moved even as the talk got darker. He stared into his drink, unmoved, untouched. "You," Grover called out suddenly, pointing with the matchstick. "Preacher, undertaker, whatever you are." The quiet man didn't look up. "You got a name?" He said nothing. "You got a past?" Still nothing. Grover chuckled and leaned forward. "You shoot? You fight? Or just sit real still like a possum hoping no one notices?" A few snickers answered him, but not many. Something about mocking a man who didn't flinch felt wrong. Eli stood nearby, sweeping the floor half-heartedly, eyes darting between the stranger and Grover. "He's listening," the boy whispered, mostly to himself. Clara finally spoke. "Some men don't talk about who they used to be. Don't mean they're not dangerous." Grover raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous don't mean a thing when you're old and alone." Sheriff Boone staggered in through the saloon doors then, squinting against the light like he'd stepped into the wrong decade. His badge sat crooked on his stained shirt, and his gut led the way. "Hell's all this whisperin' about?" he grumbled, already half drunk. "Y'all sound like church mice." "Mason Hollow riders," Jimmy said. "Burned Larkspur. Heading east." Boone blinked. "Well, we ain't Larkspur." "They're coming this way, Sheriff." "They always say that." Boone dropped into a chair and reached for the bottle behind the bar like it belonged to him. "Where's your deputies?" Clara asked sharply. "Running errands. And anyway, Don't need M unless trouble finds us. Clara stood and walked toward him. Trouble's riding straight for us, and you're half pickled. Boone smirked and took a swig. Then pour me another before they get here. Eli moved to the door, stepping onto the boardwalk, as if drawn by something outside. The wind had shifted, hotter now, but beneath it, a sound rose. Faint hooves, fast and frenzied. Then it came. A young boy rode into town like the devil was chasing him, his pony lathered and wheezing. He didn't stop until he skidded in front of a saloon, dust flying in angry clouds. He jumped off and shouted, voice ragged from the ride. They're close. Just past Red Gulch. They're coming this way. Riders, a dozen at least. The saloon burst into motion. Chairs scraped. Glasses shattered. Panic spread fast, faster than common sense. Some men reached for pistols, others for the door. Boone knocked over his bottle trying to stand. Red Gulch? That's only an hour out. Clara turned toward him, furious. Then get up, damn you. Where are your men? Out. Ain't here. Then you're the law. Act like it. Boone looked like he might argue, but the words caught in his throat. He stared blankly at the wall, face pale beneath the whiskey flush. People rushed outside. Doors slammed, shutters closed. Mothers pulled children by the arm. Some spoke of fleeing, riding hard for the next town. Others mumbled about hiding in the chapel cellar. Everyone talked at once. Everyone but the man at the bar. He hadn't moved. His hand still rested near his glass. Calm, still, as if nothing had changed. Eli stood by the door, eyes locked on the stranger. He stepped closer, emboldened by the silence. You ain't scared? He asked. The stranger finally looked at him. I've seen worse. Who are you? The man didn't answer, but his gaze held steady. Go to your ma. Stay close to her. Eli hesitated, then ran out, kicking up dust. Back inside, Grover tried to gather a few men. We stand together. Maybe they'll turn tail. Set up a barricade at the edge of town. Against a gang like that. Someone barked. We're dead before supper. They ain't just thieves, Jimmy added. They're killers. They like it. Clara gripped the edge of the bar. You got a plan? She asked the bartender, who shook his head. Everyone looked again to the quiet man. He hadn't said more than 2 words all day, but now the room treated him like a storm waiting to break. Boone stumbled forward. You used to be somebody. That right? His words were thick, but the desperation was real. Gunman? Lawman? The man didn't answer. We could use you. He finished his drink. Didn't come here to die. Then why did you come? Clara asked, stepping forward. He paused. A long moment passed. Then he said, sometimes a man don't know where he's going, just knows he can't go back. The answer silenced the room again. Clara stared at him, something breaking behind her eyes. You lost someone, didn't you? He didn't nod. He didn't have to. Outside, the sky darkened with more than just evening. A storm was coming, not one made of thunder or rain, but of lead and rage. And it had a name. Mason Hollow. Inside the saloon, fear pressed against the walls like heat. People murmured about hiding in cellars, riding out into the canyons, or just locking the church and praying. Boone slumped in a chair, head in his hands, while Grover kept pacing like a trapped animal. The quiet man rose slowly from his stool. His boots made no sound on the floorboards. He walked toward the window and looked out, scanning the horizon. Then he turned and reached into his coat. The saloon froze. He pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside, the glint of oiled steel, a revolver, old but spotless, like it had been waiting for this very moment. He opened the chamber, checked the rounds, then shut it with a click that rang louder than the piano ever had. Barricades won't stop him, he said. You want to live. Keep the women and children in the cellar. Don't beg. Don't run. And when they come through the doors. He turned, eyes colder than the desert nights. I won't miss. No one mocked him now. The piano player swallowed hard. And outside, from the ridge above Red Gulch, the first echo of distant hooves rolled in like thunder. Dusk fell like a curtain of blood and rust, casting Dead Creek in shades of fire and shadow. The last light caught the horizon just as the thunder of hooves rose beyond the ridge. It started like a tremor, a faint drumbeat over the rocks. Then came the sound of war, a dozen riders tearing across the earth, kicking up dust like a storm brewed from hell itself. The Mason Hollow riders came in fast, wild and loud. Their horses were mean things, scarred and muscled, nostrils flaring, eyes wild. Men rode them like devils, filthy lean, their faces covered in bandanas or worse, some painted with streaks of soot and blood, rifles slung across backs, pistols clanked against hips, teeth bared beneath wide-brimmed hats. At their head, astride a black stallion with white-rimmed eyes, rode Jace Mason. He sat tall, coat flaring behind him, a six-shooter in one hand and a riding crop in the other. His face was clean-shaven but cruel, the kind of handsome that made you uneasy. And when he smiled, it looked like he'd tasted fire and liked it. The town froze. Women clutched children. Men closed shutters with shaking hands. Dogs howled and disappeared under porches. The church bell rang once, then fell silent, like it, too, was afraid. Jace Mason raised his gun and fired into the air. The sound cracked like thunder, echoing through the empty main street. "Dead Creek," he shouted, voice smooth as oil. "You all know what this is." The riders fanned out, surrounding the square. "We want your coin, your guns, and your silence." No one answered. "Give us that," Jace said, grinning now. "And maybe we won't burn your little patch of dirt to the ground." Behind him, one of the riders tossed a bottle through the window of the general store. Glass shattered like ice. A woman screamed. Laughter followed. Inside the Silver Spur, the saloon had gone deathly still. Sheriff Boone stood near the door, trembling, his hand on the butt of his revolver, sweat glistening on his forehead. But he didn't draw. Not yet. The door slammed open. 4 riders strutted in first, guns drawn, eyes sweeping across the room like wolves choosing their meal. A 5th followed, big, wide-shouldered, face hidden behind a greasy red kerchief. He kicked over a stool just because it was there. Jace Mason entered last. He walked like he owned the building, the town, and every soul breathing inside it. He stepped past Boone, slapped a badge off his chest without even looking at him. Boone didn't move. He just sagged back against the wall and slid down to the floor. Grover tried to rise from his table, but a rifle slammed into his gut and folded him like paper. "Evening, boys and girls," Jace said, tipping his hat. "What a charming little hole you've got here. Full of memories, I bet. Let's make a few more." He strode through the saloon, knocking over drinks, ruffling a young man's hair like he was greeting a child, then swiping the coins from the card table and pocketing them. A rider grabbed the piano player by the collar and dragged him across the floor, laughing as the kid scrambled to get away. "Music's done for the night," the rider spat. Another outlaw leered at Clara May. "Well now," he said, stepping close. "Ain't you a surprise?" She stood her ground, eyes level. "Back off." The man grinned, reaching for her shoulder. Before he could touch her, a bottle shattered against the wall behind his head. Everyone turned. Eli stood behind the bar, holding another empty glass, chest heaving. "That's my mama you're talking to," he said, voice shaking but clear. The outlaw laughed. "Well, ain't that cute?" He took a step toward the boy, and that's when Jace raised his hand. The saloon froze. "I like this place," Jace said. "It's got grit." He pulled his revolver and spun the chamber slow, letting the sound drag across the room like a warning. "Let's play a game." He pointed the barrel toward the ceiling, then at random folks in the room. Grover still gasping for breath, the piano player on his knees, Clara with her jaw clenched tight. The barrel passed over Eli. It lingered. "You answer wrong," Jace said. "You get shot." Boone groaned from the corner. "Please." Jace aimed at him, grinned. "You already lost, lawman." He turned back to the room. "All right, question 1. Who's the richest soul in this dump?" No one spoke. The rider near Eli stepped forward. "Maybe the kid's got some silver stashed." He reached out, hand fast and sharp. "Enough." The voice was soft, measured, carried like the edge of a blade in the still air. Every head turned. The quiet man stood from his stool at the end of the bar. His hat still shaded his face, but his body was squared now, arms at his sides, fingers twitching like they remembered something no one else did. The whiskey glass sat untouched behind him. Jace tilted his head. Well, look who found his tongue. The outlaw near Eli didn't pause. He lunged, grabbing for the boy's collar. In a flash of motion too quick to track, the quiet man drew and fired. The sound was deafening. The outlaw flew backward before anyone registered what happened, crashing into a table and landing in a lifeless heap. Eli stumbled away, unharmed, eyes wide in disbelief. Silence gripped the saloon like a hand over the mouth of God. Jace stared. The quiet man didn't lower his weapon. I said enough. Jace's grin returned, but it was tighter now, uncertain. Well, he said, that's new. He stepped forward slowly. You got one shot off. Let's see if you're fast enough for the rest. The quiet man spoke again. Try it. Another outlaw moved. The man fired once, hitting him square in the chest. The body hit the floor hard. Jesus, one of the riders whispered. Boone pulled himself upright, watching like he'd just witnessed resurrection. Jace held up a hand. Hold. Hold. The riders froze. You know who I am? Jace asked. The quiet man nodded. Jace Mason, killer of children, thief of cowards, man who leaves ashes. And who the hell are you? The quiet man paused. Just a man who's tired of watching good folks die. Jace narrowed his eyes. That's a long name. I've had time to earn it. Outside, the sun slipped below the ridgeline, casting the town in a bruised twilight. The wind howled through the door, cold and dry. Jace turned to his men. He's fast. I'll give him that. But he ain't immortal. Neither are you, Clara said, her voice like iron. Jace turned back to the quiet man. All right, he said. You want to be the hero. Let's dance. He moved fast, but not fast enough. The quiet man's gun roared twice. Jace dropped his weapon as blood bloomed across his coat. He stumbled backward, gasping. The rest of the riders hesitated. Then one turned and ran. Another followed. Grover crawled toward the rifle knocked beneath the table. Boone finally found his gun, raising it with both hands. The spell was broken. In the chaos that followed, the quiet man stood still, pistol lowered but ready, watching the gang dissolve in fear. Jace coughed blood on the floor, crawling toward his fallen revolver. The quiet man stepped forward and kicked it away. You come back, he said, and I won't stop with your hand. Jace looked up, hate and fear swirling in his eyes. Then he collapsed. Outside, the sound of horses thundering away marked the end. Inside, the saloon was quiet once more. The kind of quiet that wasn't born of fear, but of awe. Eli walked slowly toward the stranger. You saved us. The man holstered his weapon. No, I just stopped the bleeding. Jace Mason's body hadn't stopped twitching before the others moved. The saloon erupted. A scream tore the air in two as the remaining riders went for their guns in a frantic storm of motion. Bottles shattered. Tables flipped. Someone dove behind the piano just as bullets started flying. The air was instantly thick with the sting of gunpowder, the room echoing with the deafening rhythm of war. The quiet man didn't hesitate. He pivoted left and fired. One clean shot, straight through the chest of a man charging with a shotgun. The bandit's boots left the ground before he crashed into the front window, shattering it into a hail of splinters. Another rider came from the far side, ducking behind an overturned table, firing blindly. The stranger dropped low, rolled across the floor in a blur of coat and shadow, and returned fire. The shot punched through the wooden edge and buried itself in the man's throat. Blood misted into the smoke like red dust. Grover yelled and scrambled to pull someone behind the bar. Clara was dragging Eli by the wrist, her face streaked with soot, jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. A bullet sliced through her sleeve, but she didn't flinch. She shoved Eli under the bar and pressed a hand to his chest. Don't move, she whispered. Across the room, Boone stood shaking, gun raised with both hands. A rider turned on him, young, sneering, face half covered by a red bandana. He fired before Boone could breathe. The sheriff dropped with a shout, blood blooming across his thigh. You son of a... He growled through his teeth. but couldn't rise. Another gunman took cover behind the bar piano, cracking off shots toward the quiet man, who weaved through the chaos like a phantom. His revolver barked twice. One shot slammed into the piano, splintering the keys. The other caught the shooter in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Smoke hung in the air now, thick and gray, swirling around the broken lantern light like a ghost searching for a name. The quiet man walked through it, slow, methodical. His coat moved like smoke itself. Every time he raised his revolver, it found its mark. The last two outlaws tried to retreat toward the door, but only one made it. The other stumbled, firing once, twice, missing both times, before a bullet slammed into his knee, sending him screaming to the floor. The man at the door froze, panting, gun shaking in his hand. The stranger stepped into the fractured light. His face was clear now, lined, weathered, eyes that held centuries behind them. Smoke curled from the muzzle of his weapon as he pointed it at the cowering bandit. Then he paused. The rider's hand trembled. "Go," the man said quietly. "Run. Tell the others." The bandit stared at him, eyes wide, blinking fast. "Tell them justice lives here." The outlaw didn't argue. He turned and sprinted into the dark, vanishing like a ghost chased by truth. And just like that, it was over. The gunfire ceased. The smoke hung heavy. The silence returned. Not the same silence as before. This one felt earned, as if the town had taken a breath it didn't know it needed. From behind the bar, Eli slowly rose, eyes wide with awe and something like understanding. Clara wrapped an arm around him, pulled him close. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but her eyes never left the man with the revolver. Boone groaned, dragging himself toward a chair, teeth clenched, one leg twisted awkwardly under him. "Sweet hell," he muttered. "You moved like a ghost." The quiet man looked down at him. "You're lucky they were slow." Clara stepped forward now, voice hushed but sure. That wasn't luck. People were stirring, coming out of hiding, emerging from doorways, the church, the corners where they'd held their breath. The saloon was in ruins, glass everywhere, piano smashed, chairs reduced to splinters. But the dead were the ones who came to hurt, not the ones who lived here. Grover leaned against the bar, wiping his face with a dirty sleeve. "Who are you?" he asked, breathless. A voice came from the back, an old man, face half lit by the flickering lamp above the bar. He didn't rise, but he spoke with the certainty of memory. "I know that shot. Heard it once in Black Hollow. Long time back." All eyes turned to him. "They called him the Reaper," the man said, almost reverently. "Reaper of Black Hollow." Another silence. A heavy one. Boone blinked hard. That a tale or a warning? The stranger, no, Jonas Hale, finally stepped into full view. He didn't deny it. The name hung in the air like smoke from a spent gun. Jonas Hale, the bounty hunter who disappeared a decade ago after his wife and son were slaughtered by outlaws. Said he hunted every man responsible. Said he found them all, one by one, never missed. Then vanished, like vengeance was all he was ever made for. Eli looked up at him, mouth dry. "You're real." Jonas glanced down at the boy. "I used to be something else." Clara stepped forward. "And what are you now?" He looked around the room, at the blood, the broken glass, the people still trembling in corners, at the boy standing beside his mother, at the old lawman bleeding and breathing. "Tired," he said softly, "but not done." Boone winced and laughed bitterly. "I'll drink to that, if someone can find me a glass." People began to move again. Clara helped him to a chair. Grover handed Eli a wet rag for his face. Someone covered the bodies. Jonas walked to the door of the saloon, staring out at the town. The wind had changed. It smelled cleaner somehow, like the storm had passed and left behind a little more sky. He stood there for a long while, as if measuring the weight of what came next. Behind him, no one said his name again. They didn't need to, because now, Dead Creek had something no map could draw, a shadow in the corner that gave people courage, a name whispered not in fear, but in hope. The Reaper of Black Hollow had returned, and this time, he wasn't running from ghosts. He was the ghost. Morning broke slow over Dead Creek. The sun rose pale and golden, spilling long shadows across broken glass and blood-darkened boards. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air like the ghost of a nightmare that hadn't quite left. But the town was quiet, whole, alive. Clara swept the steps of the general store with tired arms, her sleeve stitched clumsily where a bullet had passed. Her hands moved on their own, steady as the rhythm of breath. Across the street, Grover hammered a new sign onto the saloon's door, a jagged board to replace the one riddled with holes. Boone leaned in the frame beside him, cane in one hand, flask in the other. But for once, the lid stayed shut. Under the blue sky, the bodies were gone, buried at the edge of the desert, where dust returned to dust. At the edge of town, where the stables met the mesquite trees, Jonas Hale cinched the last strap on his saddlebag. His hat sat low on his brow, shadows brushing across his jaw like a second coat. He moved without rush, but there was purpose in every motion. A man packing not to escape, but to continue something older than memory. A soft shuffle behind him. "Where are you going?" Eli stood near the fence post, dusty boots too big for his feet, eyes full of something between defiance and grief. Jonas didn't answer right away. He adjusted his rifle holster, tightened the cinch on his mare, then turned, arms folded. "Not many places left for men like me." "You could stay." The boy's voice cracked. "Just a little. Just enough." Jonas gave a small shake of his head. "Not this time." Eli lowered his gaze, kicked a pebble. Behind them, Clara's voice broke the stillness. "Eli, come here." She walked slowly from the store, something wrapped in a cloth, in her hands. She placed a gentle palm on her son's shoulder, then stepped toward Jonas. The cloth unfolded to reveal a coin, silver, dulled by age, but polished by memory. "My husband carried this," she said quietly. "He always said he'd give it to someone real, someone who didn't need a badge to know right from wrong." Jonas looked down at the coin. For a moment he didn't move. Then he reached out and took it, weighing it in his palm. "He was a good man," he said softly. Clara nodded. "So are you." They stood that way for a long heartbeat. Then came the slow crunch of boots on dirt. Sheriff Boone stepped forward, cane tapping with every step. His face was drawn but sober. He raised a hand in a solemn salute. "You've earned more than we can give," Boone said. "But if you ever pass through again, there'll be a chair at my table and whiskey I won't be drinking." Jonas smirked faintly. Hell must have frozen. Boone chuckled, then winced as the motion tugged at his bandage. "You shoot like God made you mean." The wind shifted then, brushing against the town like a breath from something old and wide and free. Jonas placed the coin into a small pocket inside his coat. Tight. Safe. Eli took a step forward, but Clara's hand held him back. "Let him go," she said. Jonas mounted his horse in one smooth motion. The mare shifted under his weight, but didn't protest. She knew the rhythm of departure. Without another word, he turned her toward the horizon. No parade, no cheers, just the hollow hush of a town remembering how close it came to dying. He rode slow through the center of Dead Creek, past the saloon, past the church, past every door where someone watched through a window, holding a child or clutching a prayer. They didn't wave, didn't speak, but they watched, and they remembered. He reached the edge of town, paused for a breath beneath the arching arms of the desert sky, then urged the horse forward. His silhouette shrank in the rising heat. Dust curled behind him in soft spirals, swallowed slowly by the vastness of the frontier. The sun caught the edge of his coat, making it glow like ember in a dying fire. The town stood quiet. A long silence fell across the Silver Spur's door. A wind rustled the torn curtains. Somewhere a dog barked. Then nothing. But later, much later, when strangers pass through Dead Creek, they hear a story whispered over drinks and cards. A story about a quiet man, a saloon full of laughter, and a night when death came riding in on horses, only to find something older waiting inside. They laughed at the quiet man once. But now, every time a shadow crossed the Silver Spur's door, folks paused and remembered what silence can hide.